When you think of the character action genre, you probably think of the likes of Bayonetta, the original God of War games, Metal Gear Revengeance, and even Ninja Gaiden. But more importantly, the game that came to a lot of people's minds was probably one in the Devil May Cry series. Why is that? Well, although this can be partially attributed to the rise of the MC5 memes, such as Virgil's motivation, it is by and large due to the original Devil May Cry, not only defining the genre, but pretty much creating it altogether. To talk about this game, we have to first go back to the late 90s, where Capcom had found great success with its Resident Evil franchise, and was now working on a fourth main entry to the series. Resident Evil's father, Shinji Mikami, requested that Hideki Kamiya be the director of this next installment, and so he added his own spin on the franchise by making a game that strived to have style be its priority. However, in order to achieve this vision, Hideki and his team wanted to develop a dynamic camera system, which was different from the pre-rendered camera angles that Resident Evil had been known for up to this point. And with that, they set off to Europe to photograph Gothic architecture in order to be used for the game's textures. This original version of Resident Evil 4 followed a man named Tony, who had extraordinary abilities as he discovered more about himself, and the nanotechnology on his body. And after seeing this proof of concept, Shinji Mikami felt that this strayed too far from the survival horror roots that Resident Evil had. And with that, this project was no longer to be titled Resident Evil 4, but instead adopted the name Devil May Cry, with the main character Dante being named after the Divine Comedy. A few years later, in 2001, this smaller new IP from Capcom launched to astounding success, as it has sold well over 3 million copies, and critics gave it great praise for its innovative gameplay system. And with that, a genre was born. And so, I wish to go back to its roots and analyze each game in the series to see how it evolved over time. This video will be split into parts of the game I want to talk about, such as the story or the gameplay, so if you're interested in my thoughts on a specific part, this video will be split into chapters to make it easier to navigate. Without further ado, let's see what the first game has in store for us.
Let's rock, baby.
Well, there's certainly no better place to start other than the story, as it's one of the simplest and shortest of the series, and it will give you context for everything that comes later in the video. Booting up the game, we get the montage I played at the end of my intro, which is a great way to set the tone for the player, as now they know this game's story is akin to the campiness of Resident Evil, and isn't meant to be taken all that seriously. Starting a new game, we are greeted with a wall of text, as a demonic figure wielding a sword practices his moves behind it, with flames sprawling around him. And thank God this game has subtitles, because Capcom chose to use the most unreadable font of all time for their text exposition. We learn of the human and demon war from 2 millenniums ago, and how the end of it came to be when a demon named Sparta woke up to justice and rebelled against his own kind in order to protect humanity. And with that, he became known as the legendary Dark Knight Sparta. We cut to a shot of the night sky, with the moon glowing a soft purple, before a woman appears from it and descends down to the ground. And yeah, you can already see how this game does not take itself seriously. And my favorite way to describe this is that the campiness of the series became an inside joke between the developers and the player over time, where they go, "We know you know this isn't serious, but let's confuse everyone else who hasn't played these games." Anyway, turning around, the woman sees a shop with a fluorescent reddish-pink neon sign, saying, "Devil May Cry." Inside the shop, there is a man picking up a call and saying the shop is closed, and that no one seems to be using the password for his real business. Throughout this conversation, we get some character building on this man, before we even get to see him, as he lays with his feet on the desk, clearly unconcerned, and the picture of a woman right beside him. His walls seem to be decorated with skulls and weaponry, showing him to be a fighter of sorts. But before we get a good look on him, we are interrupted by the woman we saw previously, breaking into the shop with a motorbike. The man delivers the first iconic line of the game, and we finally get a good look at him. His red leather trench coat and his white long hair. This is Dante, our protagonist for this game and most of the franchise. He has always been beloved by the fans of the franchise due to his stress-free attitude and the silly shenanigans he gets up to, as demonstrated by the fact that instead of seeing this stranger as a threat, he simply tells her that if she needs the toilet, it's in the back. This emphasizes Hideki's idea of making Dante someone you'd go out drinking with. The woman now handles us some small exposition on what Dante does for a living, in order to catch the player up to speed on what kind of world this is. Dante is then attacked by this woman, who reveals herself to be a devil and zaps him with electricity, taking advantage of his stunned state to knock him down and impale him with a sword. She then teases him, asking if he really is the son of Sparta, given that he is being easily defeated, and then grabs her motorbike and throws it at him. Dante seems to slow down time itself to get his one-liner in, before defying all laws of physics and keeping the bike floating above him by shooting bullets, which goes to demonstrate the extent of his power, which he isn't showing. He quickly overpowers her, and the woman assures him they are not enemies, and reveals her name to be Trish, and that she needs his help. But also, it's shown to us that there is an uncanny similarity between her and Dante's dead mother. We are now given our third wave of exposition, as Trish explains that Dante's real enemy is the demon King Mundus, and how he is trying to return after Sparta sealed him away, and if Dante wants his revenge, he needs to make his way to Malay Island in order to stop him. The duo arrives at this island, and Trish jumps off screen, letting you gain control of Dante, but we'll talk about this in the gameplay section. For now, we explore the castle, with not much happening other than some puppets and ghosts coming to life to stop us. After a while, you'll run into a mural with a sword stuck in it. The sword's name is Alistair, and after inspecting it, Dante gets impaled by it, something which happens to be a recurring gag in the series. And instead of sticking the sword out of himself, Dante opts to get up by going through the sword's hilt, which should be considerably more painful, but instead he grabs the sword and breaks the glass ceiling above him, before busting out some moves like kicking up the sword to his hand, showing how he is still being stylish and carefree. Exploring further has you enter the chapel, where awaiting you is the game's first boss, which serves as a true test for your skill. This boss is named Phantom, and he is very over the top with wanting to kill you. But Dante keeps being himself and treats this hulking magma scorpion like it's something he sees on a day-to-day basis.
What a big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
This angers the beast, leading to the fight commencing, and after succeeding, Phantom will dissolve himself into the ground to run away. Making your way forward, you'll hit a dead end at a room where, from behind you in the mirror, your reflection seems to stop mimicking you. Once Dante notices this, the reflection casually steps out the mirror and grows himself some demonic armor, challenging Dante to a duel, which Dante points out as something he respects. This demon's name is Nilo Angelo, and his part in the story is much bigger than it may first seem. The way he challenges Dante is also really cool, as he snaps his fingers to open the door, and signals to him to follow you into the open space, to have a proper fight. The fights with him are some of the most challenging ones, reflected by how he has this grandiose intro before attacking you. As well as despite beating this fight, the cutscene still shows Dante being overpowered, and nearly killed. However, as he's being choked in the air, his amulet drops down, and Nilo Angelo seems to have a bad reaction to this, as he tosses Dante aside. And with what seems like confusion and rage, he flies away, leaving Dante to carry on with his quest. We'll explore the underground sewers of the castle, which resemble the ones from RE4 quite closely, and even encounter a new type of sin scissors, named the Death Sight. After gathering the needed items, we are able to make our way to the castle's roof, where lo and behold, Phantom is waiting to ambush us. He tells Dante this time he won't be holding back as a scare tactic, but Dante is either too confident or too unbothered to take this as a serious threat, and retorts back with his own comment.
Finally! I was getting tired of playing your childish games!
The fight is much like the first, and upon death, Phantom will collapse through the ground and get impaled on the statue from the start of the game, really showing the connectivity in this world map. Sort of like this very underground and niche game. Oh, what was it called? There, that's my Dark Souls reference for the video. Devil May Cry is the Dark Souls of hack and slash. With his dying breath, Phantom asks who Dante is, as no ordinary human could hold that much power. And he reveals that he is indeed Sparda's son, which also shows why his mother and brother were killed, as Mundus was getting revenge on Sparda, sealing his powers away.
You're right. I'm his son, Dante. Sweet dreams.
From within the castle, Trish commentates on Dante's feat of killing Phantom, with a rather suspicious tone. Surely nothing will come of this. I mean, it's not like she attacked us the moment she met Dante. Oh wait, that is exactly what she did. Yep, I'm sure no harm will come to Dante from trusting her. After killing Phantom, we are able to leave the castle and explore the remainder of Malay Island, where you'll traverse an open area which introduces you to the new enemies called the Blades. You'll follow some blue flames which guide you throughout this mission, where you'll find a new weapon for Dante called Ifrit, and much like Alistor, Dante will have fun messing around with this weapon when receiving it. Exiting back onto the field, a cutscene will play where a red lightning storm appears in the sky, and from within, a massive bird-like creature appears, its beak being split in three to show its mythological appearance. This massive bird perches atop the Colosseum and asks you if you are the human who challenges Mundus, and Dante replies with another iconic line.
Block off, Featherface, or you can stick around and find out the hard way.
Again, this line isn't particularly good, but it certainly fits the campy nature of these games. After defeating Griffin, you can enter a forested area, where you'll encounter yet another enemy type, which are called the Fetish. No, that can't be right. No, yeah, it is. Huh. Each of these guys is called Fetish. Okay, sure, I've seen weirder. After traversing a foggy path, you'll reach a building, and inside you'll find a chalice you need to progress. However, removing said chalice will trigger a cutscene, where none other than our favorite demon, Nilo Angelo, appears. This time around, Dante manages to overpower Angelo, and he runs away in order to live. Dante will then make his way onto a submerged ghost ship, and after swimming through to the upper deck and fighting another Death Scythe, he'll be able to activate a spell of sorts. But before we can enter the captain's quarters, we are interrupted once again by Griffin, giving us a cool yet gimmicky set piece as we fight him whilst he flies. The fight ends abruptly with no cutscene for Griffin's defeat, suggesting he is very likely to return. The next mission then starts with you acquiring the Staff of Hermes, which causes the ship to start sinking and having you swim your way back out. You'll traverse some traps, which are nothing to be worried about, and eventually you'll be able to unlock the door to the Colosseum. In the center of the Colosseum is a circular rune, which asks for a sacrifice from you in order to open the path to the Wheel of Destiny. And right on cue, Griffin appears before us once more. A decision he'd sorely regret, as Dante defeats him with ease, and the stone pillar impales him onto the circle. Griffin recognizes our strength as the powers of Sparda, even going as far as saying Dante may be stronger. However, he cannot allow us to win, and he begs of his master to help him one final time by lending him more power to keep fighting Dante. This causes Mundus to finally reveal himself, as 3 red eyes appear in the sky. But instead of helping Griffin, Mundus shows his cruelty and tells Griffin that he has failed him, and begins striking him down with what seems like an excruciatingly painful death from Griffin's screeches and screams of agony. Trish finally returns to us, and Dante talks to her about how Mundus sickens him, as he kills his own servants. He talks about how his father Sparta protected the weak, and promises in his name that he too will kill Mundus to avenge his family. Trish leaves us, and with the Wheel of Destiny in our hands, we are able to open up the way back to the castle. Returning inside, the castle is filled with darkness, and making our way back to the chapel, we find another boss, made of a dark sludge, its name being Nightmare. Once defeated, it will open up the way to you being able to use paintings, Mario 64 style, in order to traverse the next levels. This part of the story mostly consists of traversing old locations, with the addition of new icy enemies, as well as a cool section where you hit a fossil's fireballs back to him. This culminates with the final fight against Nilo Angelo. However, for this fight, he decides to take off his helmet and reveal who he truly is. At this point, the player won't know who that's meant to be, but if you already played the series before, you know how hype it is to find out that the cool knight you've been fighting this entire time was actually Virgil himself, which is shown in this final fight, as he'll use summoned swords to attack Dante. Defeating him one last time leads to his presumable death, as he disappears in an explosion of lightning, and from with that, drops an amulet similar to the one Dante has. And we hear his mother Eva wish him and his brother Virgil a happy birthday, revealing that the knight was indeed Dante's brother.
Virgil, Dante, happy birthday. Wow! I want chocolate! No, I want chocolate!
We cut to a different location where a giant stone statue commands Trish to go after Dante now that Virgil has been defeated, which both reveals to us that Trish is in fact not on our side like she claimed, as well as showing us what Mundus looks like as he sits on his throne in this ethereal room. And a nice detail in this reveal is that Mundus chose to have his physical form be a copy of the statue in the very first room of the game, which Dante stated to be a god worshipped long ago, showing to us that Mundus believes if he takes on this form, he'll be seen and worshipped as a god by his followers, rather than the demon that he is. The following mission starts with Dante combining the two amulets, and the sword Force Edge to reveal its true form, the Devil Sword Sparta, giving us an excellent cutscene demonstrating how it works for the player to see why it is so powerful, as it's able to change shape to suit the user's needs during a combo. Its drawback being Dante is no longer able to use his staple Devil Trigger abilities. Some light foreshadowing for what is to come. Moving forward, Dante will traverse parts of the castle until he reaches the courtyard once again, where he'll have his rematch with Nightmare, and after making some quick work of him, you'll get an item to traverse into the mirror dimension. Here, you'll get introduced to some of the toughest enemies, the Nobodies. Returning to the chapel, you'll be able to enter Nightmare's puddle, which happens to lead to the entrance to the underworld. Dante makes his way across the fleshy and veiny terrain of the underworld, until he enters an arena-like room, its ceiling glowing with runes. On the other side is Trish, calling out for help, and Dante rushes in with no hesitation, which causes him to fall right into her trap, leading to yet another fight against Nightmare. As you get close to defeating him, now for the third time, Trish will show her true colors to Dante, as she strikes him with lightning from the back. Who could have seen this coming?
You fool! You're so easy!
Trish, you?
After managing to defeat both of them, Nightmare will die in an explosion of light. How fitting. And Trish is about to get crushed by a stone pillar, but Dante chooses to save her, something which puzzles Trish. She asks him the reason for this selfless act, given that she tried to kill him. And while some may expect this to be the declaration of love part of the game, it's far from it, as Dante says she looks like his mother, who he lost all those years ago. Trish rushes after him to apologize, but Dante snaps back at her, calling her a devil, and saying while she may look like his mother, she will never have her soul. Dante leaves the room and Mundus appears beside Trish, telling her she too has failed him. After traversing more of the underworld, Dante will find himself at Mundus's gates, ready for his final showdown. But on the other side is something completely different from what we just came from, as we enter what seems to be a cathedral, with a polished floor and marble pillars around us. Dante makes his way forward to Mundus, to finally confront the demon who changed the course of his life all those years back. Dante attempts to take control of the situation by telling Mundus how he will share the same fate from when he fought his father. But then Mundus reveals his ace in the hole by showing Trish strapped to a... Hey, wait a minute. Those cuffs aren't even closed. How is she just floating up there? Anyway, Mundus shoots some blades made from demonic energy into Dante's body, which isn't all that threatening considering how many times he has been impaled in this game alone. But this time it seems to affect Dante, as he is not able to move, leading Mundus to question if Sparta's power is weaker in Dante, something which he'll soon find out is not the case. Mundus goes for a killing blow, but Trish pushes Dante out of the way, having herself being struck instead. Mundus shows his disgust for Trish's lack of loyalty, and simply goes for another kill shot on Dante. However, this time, Dante easily deflects his blast, and tells him to show himself. This triggers one of the game's only pre-rendered cutscenes, which hasn't aged all that well now that the game has been remastered. In this cutscene, Mundus breaks free from the confines of the statue, with rays of light bursting through the cracks, and once he is free, he creates an entirely new universe for him and Dante to have their showdown in. Dante asks him why he killed his mother, and Mundus calls her a useless being, and tells him he could create as many as he wanted, just the same way he created Trish. This deeply angers Dante, who snaps at him with demonic glow in his eyes. Mundus begins rising and Dante chases after, activating a new devil trigger for the fight. Sparta's devil trigger, which explains why you weren't able to use your regular DT while wielding the sword. And so the fight begins between the two, where after a lot of damage, Dante will be able to ground Mundus, but not before Mundus strikes Dante with his energy beams, and hits him with a volley of meteors, which leads to Dante falling down to the surface of a volcanic planet. Mundus descends down onto the center, and the two continue their battle, with Dante being victorious in the end, as Mundus crumbles to nothing. We return to Mundus's throne room, where Dante finds Trish, dead on the floor. Dante sees the tragedy of how, just like his mother, Trish gave her life to save his. And we get possibly the best line delivery in gaming history, right up there with Master of Unlocking from the original Resident Evil.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
Putting aside that golden line delivery, I mean, really just spectacular, this is actually rather sad, as Dante has already lost his family once, and was now forced to lose them all over again, as he was forced to kill Virgil and watch Trish, who looked like his mother, die in order to save him. Dante takes all this trauma and decides to do the only act of emotional maturity in the entire series, where he leaves the Sparta sword and amulet behind in order to let go of his past.
My father's also here now. Rest in peace.
The rest of the game is about escaping Malay Island, as the grounds are now unstable and you have to make your way back to the start of the game. However, as you get close to the entrance of the castle, the floor below you collapses, and you find yourself back in the sewers, with the only exit being blocked off. and in front of Dante a multitude of symbols begin flashing, before Mundus reappears. He tells him this is where Dante will die, and given that they are both trapped, Dante takes the chance to tell Mundus that this too will be his burial ground.
This is where you will die.
I'm not going anywhere! Besides, there's no place to go! Look around! This will be your burial ground as well!
As the two fight, Mundus begins showing his real appearance, an amalgamation of magma hands and eyeballs, but he still shows no signs of slowing down. But right before everything seems lost, Dante hears his mother, telling him he can do it, and with a flash of lightning, Trish appears from behind him, lending him her power in order to defeat Mundus together. With her and Dante's power infused into Ebony and Ivory, the fight is quickly over.
It looks like we have a winner.
Jackpot.
Dante, I will return, and I will rule this world.
Goodbye. And when you do come back, give my regards to my son, will ya?
The game is not over yet though. As the duo embrace, Trish sheds a tear, something which Dante says is a human quality, showing that there may be some humanity to this demon after all. Looking around them, Trish gives up the hope of escaping, but Dante reminds her that humans never give up, as the plane we saw at the very start falls through the ground. Nope, we're not doing this bit again. We hop on the plane and, much like Resident Evil 4, we have a vehicle section for escaping the island. We now get another pre-rendered cutscene where the island explodes, sending out a purple shockwave with it. Trish comments on how blue the sky is, which could signify she had never seen the world for its true beauty before gaining her humanity, or it could also mean that she had never seen what a normal sky looked like, as she was always under the orange sky of Malay Island. Dante tells Trish the fight is not over yet, as the evil forces will return someday, and Trish decides to become his sidekick as the duo fly into the sunrise. But before the credits roll, we get one last cutscene where we see Dante's new shop name. Devils Never Cry. Overall, Devil May Cry has a simplistic yet effective story, which is a great setup for the rest of the series, as it introduces tons of concepts to be further expanded on, particularly about a certain family member of Dante. And although Dante's arc has been resolved within the very first entry, as he has achieved his lifelong goal, Capcom managed to give him new, more interesting arcs to go through. No, that most certainly does not include you. Back into the void you go. Okay, now we get to the fun part of this game and the series as a whole, its gameplay. Devil May Cry games are first and foremost gameplay-driven games, as they innovate the genre every time a new game is put out. No? What did I just say? We're still not talking about that one. And believe me, that abomination is getting its own video on why it's a terrible sequel. Before I start talking about the gameplay, I just want to say I'm no expert on these games. I'm skilled enough to play on Son of Sparta and can get triple S ranks during gameplay and fights pretty easily, but when it comes to long combo chains or whatever the hell Royal Guard flying is, that's when I start getting out of my depth. So, I will instead explain all the moves you can perform and, in the future, try to analyze how they fit Dante's character, as well as how well designed the enemies are for the combat flow. As you probably know, the main goal of a fight when playing a DMC game is making sure your style ranking goes up, and in order to do so, you're expected to perform a multitude of moves in order to keep it fresh. Otherwise, if you simply spam Stinger for example, sure, you'll be able to beat most enemies this way, but not only will you not have fun in doing so, but you'll also miss out on extra orbs or even faster combos in later entries. So, it goes without saying that the better games will be the ones with the most fun and highest amounts of moves, something that, while not being fully fulfilled in this entry, was certainly a great start for the franchise. Beginning with traversal, this game, as expected, has the most simple moves. You have your defaults like moving and jumping, as well as being able to kick yourself up the wall for extra height. On top of this, you'll be able to purchase air hike in order to gain a double jump. However, instead of this being a universal skill, you can actually only use this with certain weapons. The first weapon, and the most basic one, is the Force Edge, as it's only got 5 attacks. You have the basic 3-hit combo, which you'll use the most. Combo 2 allows you to slash nearby enemies while dealing heavy damage to the enemy directly in front of you. Combo 3 is the first iteration of Million Stab, as Dante quickly performs piercing motions with a sword onto the enemy in front of him. In order to perform Combo 2 and 3, you need to have different length pauses after your second strike, which is never told to the player, even in the Actions tab, meaning you'll likely find these moves by experimenting, and feel pretty cool when you find these secret combos. The final 2 moves for Force Edge are High Time, which allows you to launch the enemy into the air, as well as yourself if you hold the attack button while doing it. Once in the air, if you strike down with your sword again, as opposed to using your guns to remain in the air, you will perform a Helm Breaker, which is a downward slash with your sword, perfect for staggering the enemies below you. On the second mission, you obtain the main weapon for the game, that being Alastor, and its base moves are carried over from Force Edge. However, entering a divinity statue will allow you to purchase further actions for it, with the best and most famous one being Stinger, as Dante will dash forward, plunging Alastor into whatever enemy he's locked onto. This is one of the highest damage attacks, and it's great for knocking back enemies to create openings for further combos. The other attack that comes with the sword is Round Trip, which allows you to throw it like a boomerang, as well as giving Dante the opportunity to throw hands while his weapon returns to him. The other skills are to do with Devil Trigger, which is a skill you unlock alongside Alastor. Devil Trigger is the original Rage mode. You know, the cheating skill you use in God of War. Well, this is its origin. As Dante strikes enemies, or takes damage himself, his DT notches will begin filling up, and once 3 of them are full, by pressing the left shoulder button, Dante will call upon his demonic side, to give him extra powers such as a higher damage output, getting stunned less often, slowly regenerating his health, as well as providing Dante with some variations to his moves, such as greatly extending the Kick 13 attack when equipping Ifrit. Furthermore, many of the weapons will gain additional moves while in Devil Trigger, such as Air Raid and Meteor, which respectively charge up Dante's shots with their weapons elements, as well as the special moves like Vortex, where you spin into enemies, and the powerful Inferno, where you create a wall of fire around you. You are free to switch between these 2 weapons by pressing the right stick, and a nice detail is when you switch to Alastor, Dante will reenact his impalement pose. Another thing I'd like to touch on is that in this game, Dante's DT will change according to what weapon he chooses to wield, with Alastor providing him greater movement speed, and Ifrit giving him only a damage boost. This is a nice detail that can be noticed in the franchise, but as we move through the game chronologically, Dante will begin relying less on the Devil Arms for his DT, as DMC3 shows him fully transform based on the weapon wielded, and DMC1 does this similarly, but only when Dante is attacking. However, later entries in the timeline choose to give him a standard Devil Trigger state, potentially signifying that once Dante used Sparta's Devil Trigger and defeated Mundus, he was able to master his own DT. The next Devil Arm up on the list is Ifrit, a pair of gloves in the shape of dragon heads, found in the gardens of Malay Island. This weapon is extremely different from the other Devil Arms, as it is by far the slowest, as well as having very short range. To balance this, however, its hits deal significantly more damage, especially when charged up, as each hit on the basic combo can be held for a brief period of time, in order to apply an even greater force on the enemy, allowing you to break their guard. However, this is harder to perform, as you are also more likely to get hit by the enemies around you during that charge-up animation. Its Helm Breaker equivalent is a Dive Kick, which allows Dante to move towards the enemy on his descent, which is useful for closing the gap between yourself and your next target. When jumping up with Ifrit, Dante will perform Rolling Blaze, where he surrounds himself with flames on his way up, damaging nearby enemies. Ifrit also has equivalents for Stinger and High Time, those being Kick 13 and Magma Drive respectively, with them being extra useful as you can chain them very easily mid-combo. The Magma Drive, much like High Time, will send enemies upwards, with the charged up version sending a bigger magma wave upwards. Kick 13 is an interesting move, as normally it's a singular roundhouse kick. However, when DT is activated, it will actually extend this move to a flurry of punches and kicks, which is perfect for breaking the guard of enemies like Nilo Angelo. And the final Devil Arm is the Sparta Sword, the true form of the Force Edge, and it's basically a copy of Alistar. However, when performing any action that isn't the base combo, the sword will shift into different shapes to make the attack more efficient, such as extending itself into a spear when using Stinger, or becoming a scythe when using Round Trip. The sword will also be able to send out powerful shockwaves with each swing when unlocking its Devil Trigger during the Mundus boss fight. Now onto the guns. First up, Ebony and Ivory, the only weapons which Dante carries with him in every single entry of the franchise, as they were specifically crafted for him, with Ebony providing range and comfort, while Ivory was custom built for quick firing and fast draws. The pistols on their own don't do a lot of damage, and are instead meant to be used as a means of juggling enemies or building up DT. The pistols can also be infused with demonic power when charged, allowing for a short burst of more powerful shots. And this applies to all other guns, so I don't repeat myself. The second staple gun of the franchise is the sawed-off shotgun, which has a much higher power outage at the cost of reduced range and fire rate, so this weapon is more effective when used to make some space while fighting enemies up close. This weapon, just like Ebony and Ivory, can be charged to release more powerful shots for a short time. The needle gun exists, I guess. I mean, you can only really use it underwater, and it's kind of a letdown. The grenade launcher is a very powerful weapon, but suffers from the slowest reload time, as well as not being a hit scan weapon, meaning you can actually miss if the enemy moves too quickly. So you'd think this weapon is kinda useless in a fast-paced game like Devil May Cry, right? Wrong! See, you can cancel the recoil animation of the grenade launcher by either dodge rolling or jumping right after the shot, allowing Dante to fire these shots at a much faster rate, which is especially handy for building up DT, as each successful shot gives you close to a full notch of Devil Trigger. And the final gun to talk about is Nightmare Beta, and this is one of the stranger weapons in the series, as it's a bit more gimmicky. Its normal shot will be a projectile which pierces enemies and bounces off surfaces before disappearing. Charging up the weapon, however, will actually require some DT notches, and in doing so, you'll be able to fire multiple, larger bolts of energy. This gun is also extremely useful for achieving good stylish ranks, as simply spamming it will quickly grant you an S tier. I find this weapon most useful when dealing with the nobodies, as it pretty much stun locks them. And finally, the last piece of gameplay provided to the player in this game are items. These range from passive items such as the orbs, or items that require actions to use in order to restore health or deal damage to enemies. Right, now that we're done with Dante's moveset and items, let's have a quick overview of all the enemies in the game. I say quick, but just reading through the wikis of these enemies, it's probably enough for its own video, so I'll just try and summarize it for you kind viewers. Up first, we got the most common enemy in the marionettes. These guys will be the enemy you deal with the majority of the time, and their moves are relatively simple. They will slash at you or throw their blades towards you. Some rarer attacks include grabbing you, meaning you'll have to free yourself in order to take less damage. These guys are great for maintaining combos, as they are very easy to stagger into air launch. Their upgraded form, the fetishes, have weapons imbued with fire, as well as being able to throw them like boomerangs, meaning you'll have to dodge twice out of their way. After this, we got the Sin Scissors and Scythes, as well as their upgraded form, the Death Scissors and Scythes. These are ghostly demons that will hide away from the player in walls, and close in for a quick swipe. A quick way to rid yourself of them is to hit their weak spot with a shotgun, point blank. The next low-level enemies are the Beelzebubs, which reside in the sewer, stick to walls, and are absolute fodder enemies, as you can very quickly rid yourself of them by spamming them with your pistols. Some of the harder enemies include the Blades, which are warrior lizards, and the Frosts, which I've always seen as ice-powered blades, given their similar aesthetic and close-quarters attacks. The tricky part with dealing with them, however, is their tendency to teleport whenever you're about to hit them, making them a pain in the ass to keep a combo in this game. The final two tougher and rarer enemies are the nobodies and the plasmas. The former attack you viciously with their more animalistic behavior, as well as draining your DT, while the latter refuse to die, as they will seemingly form a copy of themselves without warning, on top of being able to turn themselves into a copy of you. And finally, we got the bosses, and while the first game contains the smallest number of them, it also contains some of the most well-designed in the series. Starting with Phantom, he is your classic monster boss fight, where the boss is much bigger than the player and can take a lot of hits. This is a perfect introductory boss type, as it allows the player to get a feel for what a tougher encounter will look like. Phantom also has a really unique design, as his magma body translates into his fiery attacks. On top of this, he is one of the only enemies in the game who is able to fully block Dante's attacks, meaning the player has to consider when he is able to retaliate. Up next, we got Shadow, which at first I considered a mini-boss. However, after I played the MC5 a few years back, I can no longer say this, given that he is basically treated as having the same level of importance as the other bosses in this game. Shadow is an interesting one, as it relies on you first weakening him with your guns before being able to attack his core with your sword, as well as having a self-destruct mode of sorts, where when low, it will attempt to eat Dante one more time and then blow up, dealing more damage to the player. Another fan favorite in the franchise is Griffin, who focuses more on ranged attacks, causing the player to rely more on their reflexes during the fight. And aside from the ship fight, which feels very gimmicky, I'd say Griffin is one of my favorite bosses in the series. Another reoccurring boss is Nightmare, and he is the second most gimmicky fight in the game. Yes, there is one that is worse. You see, Nightmare has a lot of fast ranged attacks, as well as requiring you to constantly power up the lights, as otherwise it will lead to you being swallowed by his darkness, and being forced to fight another boss inside him. Luckily though, killing the secondary boss will deal a large chunk of damage to Nightmare. Honestly, I'm pretty mixed when it comes to Nightmare, especially since it's hard to hit the switches, as the first two entries in the series have the tendency to force Dante to swing towards an enemy even when you're not locked on, making it a pain to hit the switches on time. And finally, we got Mundus, which is the perfect set of boss fights for a finale, but not so much for gameplay. And I'm not really sure what the majority think, but I personally hated his first phase, as I never quite understood how to efficiently dodge his attacks. Again, this may just be me having a lack of skill rather than poor enemy design, but I am ashamed to admit I've never beaten this first phase without using at least one Devil Star to finish him off a bit quicker. Aside from this, however, I really enjoy the rest of the fight. You have this massive volcanic planet in an entirely different universe, and you have to platform your way over to him and hit him with the now super overpowered Sparta sword, given that you can now use its devil trigger, and it just feels awesome. And yeah, that's all the bosses in the game. Can't think of another one. Oh, who am I kidding? I would never forget about Nello Angelo. I mean, seriously, his fights feel like something out of DMC3 with how smooth and quick-paced his attacks are. Every time I fight him, I feel like he's no match for me after replaying this game multiple times. But then he goes and kicks my ass anyway, especially his third fight, where he begins spamming his summon swords, making it all the more thrilling. I mean, seriously, his fights alone probably pushed this game from a low 8 to a 9. He is seriously the best boss in the game, and I look forward to his encounters the most when replaying it. And on top of all this, he also has one of the most iconic looks in the franchise. I mean, duh, of course he does. He is motherfucking Virgil. No wonder he gets to be the coolest in a game where he isn't even the main villain. And with that, I've finished my section on the gameplay. So I think it's time we move on to something this game both excels in and fails at the same time. And that would be level design. Now, I'm very conflicted when talking about this section, because I believe this game has both really high highs, but also some of the lowest lows. So how about we just go through the game mission by mission and talk about what works and what doesn't. Starting at mission 1, this game has a strong opener, as you have to explore the large entrance hall of the castle, as well as making your way across rooms and up and down floors to find new key items. This first mission serves really well to combine exploration and small combat arenas in order to show you what the rest of the game will feel like, as well as showing the interconnectivity of the map, as it's not simply a straight line from the start to the end of the mission like it is in other entries in the franchise. Furthermore, when the first enemies are introduced, they attack you as a direct result of your actions, something which tends to occur often in this game, as when you interact with a key item, the game will ask you if you are sure you wish to proceed, as doing so will likely trigger an encounter or a trap, making you, the player, directly responsible for what happens next. Mission 2 carries on the great level design of the first mission by having you loop around the same area a few times, but with different key items, as you make your way around in order to open up new areas. This mission also grants you 2 new weapons, one melee and one firearm, in order to showcase to the player that as they progress, they may find new gameplay items on top of the key items they are looking for. Mission 3 is slightly different from the others, as it is a boss fight mission, where you won't do much more than fight Phantom. However, the aesthetic of the arena is really great, as you fight in this small chapel, which is a very beginner-friendly arena, as you'll have both a large open area as well as some cover if necessary, allowing new players to experiment with what works best for them when dealing with bigger threats. This nice level design continues throughout most of the game, as you have exploration segments, fighting segments, and boss fights to keep you entertained, all while traversing through the interconnected world. This, however, all comes to a halt when you reach the outdoors area of the game, as now the game becomes very linear, with very little exploration to be found, aside from the odd open area here and there. There are, however, some interesting concepts to be found here, which would come back later in the franchise, such as the forest puzzle, where following the wrong path will send you back to the start. In spite of this, there are also some aspects that returned later which were not looked upon as fondly, such as the extremely unnecessary platforming segments, where you awkwardly have to maneuver over small platforms while dealing with mostly fixed camera angles which provide little to no indication as to the size of the gaps between the platforms. And let's not talk about the dreaded underwater levels, where you lose all sense of stylish combat and are forced to navigate in first person, through a sunken ship or revisit an old area later on, where you need to spam swimming upwards to reach the exit in time. I mean, seriously, who the hell playtested these and thought they were a good addition? Something else that is a staple in the series, which I haven't touched upon, is the secret missions hidden throughout the regular missions. These are short challenges provided to the player which have a range of conditions to be met, be it fighting 3 shadows at once, or crushing 100 baby phantoms with nothing but your feet. These are fun bonus levels which provide the player with a blue orb fragment when beaten, giving them an incentive to search for these throughout their playthrough. Returning to the castle is when the level design really starts crashing down, as instead of exploring halls and rooms trying to find your way around, you'll instead use Mario 64 paintings to just teleport to the next location, which could have been easily avoided if they included more sections like the Mirror World, where yes, you are going through the same room, but it's now inverted with a much more creepy atmosphere formed by the background changing to a more hellish scenery. After going through a few more rooms that you've already visited and dealing with yet another platforming section, you'll reach Hell, which, despite its linearity, is a phenomenal setting in the game, as they chose to make this franchise's underworld something that feels living, with the pulsating fleshy walls and giant heart blocking the path forward. I mean, overall, this game has great design aspects, which are beautifully expanded on in entries like the MC3, but also some not so well designed segments, like the platforming sections not working with the fixed camera angles, or the lack of connectivity later on, making it feel like the world is not as well thought out compared to the starting section. In general though, this game feels a lot like a Resident Evil entry when it comes to its design, which both works for and against itself, but personally I feel it works really well. Except the underwater sections. Those can go fuck. Sure enough, Devil May Cry is known for its gameplay. However, it's also just as well known for something else. Its music. Now, I'm no music theory expert, which you can tell by how short this section of the video is, but even I can talk to you about how much of a banger each track in this game is. We got the main combat theme, Public Enemy, which starts off with a great intro that tricks you into thinking this will be a survival horror like Resident Evil, before the beat kicks in and you realize you shouldn't be afraid of the enemies, they should be afraid of you. We also have the infamous castle theme, which embeds part of Resident Evil 4's theme into this sinister ambience sound, complete with an organ, giving it this claustrophobic atmosphere, despite the open-ended grand hall. Later on in the cathedral, the opposite atmosphere is created, as this smaller area is given a grandiose melody, giving you the hit of adrenaline you need in preparation for the Phantom fight. And of course, the track everyone unanimously praises, Ultraviolet. And it is praised for good reason, as this is this game's Virgil theme, opening with pipe organs and a chanting choir, and then switching to an absolute blast with the electric guitar and synths, which perfectly encapsulates the contrasting themes in DMC, as it feels like the two brothers are fighting each other in the melody. Devil May Cry soundtracks are some of the few I find myself returning to due to their ever-changing styles throughout the games, so I definitely recommend giving them a listen to. Plus, you know, this soundtrack is filled with dirty jokes such as Blue Orgasm or I'm Coming, so that alone makes it a fun time. In conclusion, despite its flaws, Devil May Cry is still a classic. And even though the gameplay is a bit outdated, as it released over 2 decades ago, there is still great fun to be found here, especially with the game's atmosphere, comical dialogue choices, and most importantly, this being the start of the franchise's #1 rule: style above all else. Thank you so much for watching, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
It looks like we have a winner.
Jackpot.